Hi all, it's PJ with Montevilla Sewing Centers. This video section is on hooping and how to hoop. Before we get into the hooping, here are a few general guidelines for hooping. Use the smallest hoop available for your chosen design. Start with pressed fabric and stabilizer. Use fusible, tacky, or temporary spray adhesive to affix your fabric to the stabilizer. Whenever possible, hoop the fabric and the stabilizer together. The fabric and stabilizer should be at least 1 inch larger than the hoop on all sides. 2 inches is actually better. Use the appropriate stabilizer for the fabric and design. Here are the items that I'm going to use for my hooping. I've got stabilizer. This is Collins Wonder Tape. I have a heat erasable pen. This is a friction marker. I have a nice gridded ruler. I have my fabric that I want to embroider on. I've got my hoop, so the inside hoop, the outside hoop, and I've got a hooping template. You may or may not have a hooping template, and if you don't, I'll show you how to use the marks on your hoop to help you with that. I'm going to move some of this out of the way to start with. So here's the first little tip that I've got for you. If you have just taken your stabilizer off of the roll and it's all rolly like this, you can press your stabilizer. I just put it face down, take the iron over it and press it flat, and you'll end up with a nice flat piece of stabilizer like this. If you happen to be using a fusible stabilizer, just put the fusible side on top of an applique pressing sheet, and then you can press, and then you can just peel it up and it'll be nice and flat. It will just make your job easier. Marking your fabric, I am going to put a crosshair in here where I want the center of my design to be. And I'm purposely going to draw it not someplace in the pattern just to make it a little bit easier so that it will show up. So I am going to make a nice long line here. And then I'm going to make the cross line. To make sure that I'm getting this very accurate, when I mark for this one, I'm going to hold this ruler up so that you can see it a little bit better. There's solid lines, there's dashed lines, and then there's really dashed lines. I like to use this line to line up to my line here so that I can make sure that I'm exactly right on here. And I make my lines fairly long. I think it just helps when you go to line up to that. All right, so there's my crosshair in place. You're going to put your fabric over your stabilizer. So we've got that. Here's the deal. You've got stabilizer, you've got fabric, outside hoop, inside hoop, and possibly a hooping template. So there's a lot of moving parts here. One of the most accurate ways to get a good hooping is to try to minimize what I call the moving parts. So the first thing that you would want to do is you somehow want to adhere your stabilizer to your fabric. If this is a fusible stabilizer, you would simply just fuse that. And you can see here that my stabilizer is larger than my fabric. So if you were fusing this, I would fuse from the back side, and I would just fuse down the center of this. You don't want to get over here past your fabric because you don't want to fuse this to your ironing board. But you want to get the middle section fused in. So that would be your first option. If it isn't fusible, then I would use temporary spray adhesive. And I would spray the stabilizer and then stick my fabric to it. So I'm going to go do that right now. There is a whole video just on temporary spray adhesives. So I'm just positioning this in the middle, and I'm kind of starting from the center, and I'm smoothing that to the outside to make sure everything is all nice and flat. So there used to be two things. Now those are stuck together as one thing. And this end, I'm just going to kind of fold up so that it's out of our way. All right, so there's that. So before we go any farther, we're going to do what's called pre-tensioning the hoop. I should explain why you pre-tension your hoop, unhoop, and then completely rehoop. When you're pre-tensioning the hoop, you have tightened your screw here. In essence, what you're doing is you're tightening the bottom part of the hoop. When you unhoop and then completely rehoop, you're distributing the tension evenly throughout the hoop. So you would pre-tension, unhoop, then completely rehoop to distribute the tension evenly throughout the entire hoop. Here's how to pre-tension the hoop. So for this, I'm not worried at all about the placement. I just want to get my hoop set up. I have loosened this quite a lot. I'm just going to slide this under here. And again, right now, I'm not worried about placement at all, but I have the fabric I'm going to use and the stabilizer that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to hoop this up. And again, I'm not worried about placement because obviously there's my crosshair, not the center of my hoop. So I'm just positioning that. Now I'm going to tighten this. And I just want this to be thumb tight. You don't really need to get in there with a screwdriver and really reef that down. It just wants to be snug. All right, now this is what is considered pre-tensioning. You've got your hoop set up for your fabric and the stabilizer. You can unhoop this now, but do not move this screw. And to unhoop, I just put my thumbs here and just push. Okay, now smooth this out. It wasn't in there very long. You shouldn't have to go and repress that. However, if for some reason it was left in there, you might want to press that. Just be careful if you used a friction pin for your crosshair because you wouldn't want to erase your line. Okay, so now your hoop is set up the way that it should be. If you do not have a hooping template, generally there are notches on your hoop that will align to the center of the hoop. So you can use those. Now, when you go to try to hoop this up and get your outside hoop, your outer hoop underneath, you're going to have trouble because it's all going to move around. To help keep your hoop in position on here, this is Collins Wonder Tape. And I just take, this is just double stick tape. I just take a little piece of this, maybe an inch or so, and I just put a little bit at the top and the bottom of my hoop. This will just help to hold this into place while you're trying to get this positioned. And then just peel off the protective paper. And now, and this is also why I make these lines really long. And you can see my top line here, my vertical line, could have actually been a little bit longer. So I'm just going to extend that a little bit. So now when I position my hoop using those lines, I'm trying to get to the center of this and the center of this, and here and here. And then once I get that positioned correctly, you should also do this while standing over the top of your hoop and lean over it and get a nice bird's eye view looking down. But once I get that in position, I'm just going to press gently where I added that double stick tape. So now that is connected. So once again, less moving parts. So this used to be 3 things, now it's only 1 thing. It's now much easier to slide your hoop underneath. I like to do mine from the top, but really you need to just figure out what works best for you. I like to set the top of my hoop first and then just walk my hands down. And it should just pop right into place. if you have a hooping template, you can use that to help you align this even further by positioning this. And you can see there's the center marks, but here's actually the center of the hoop. It's off that mark just a little bit. When I do this as well, I like to go just to the top or the bottom and to the left or the right, and just make sure that my line is running parallel to make sure that I can see the entire line. And there is a little bit of movement here, so just know that. And again, I'm just pushing where that little bit of double-sided tape is to connect that in there. When you're doing this, to me, what's really important is that you get your north, south, east, and west correct. And in this case, meaning that those lines are running parallel to your grid. Once you put this into your machine, if you are slightly off of your center, you can always nudge up or down to get your needle to drop exactly into the center of your design. Here's a better explanation on why to run your drawn lines parallel to the lines on the grid. You can see here in the diagram on the left, the red line, which is the template line, is really quite thick. And some of the templates, it is really that thick. If you line up your drawn lines directly underneath that quite thick line, you could actually be at the top on one side and at the bottom on the other side and not even know it, because the template line is actually covering your entire drawn line. If you go just to the left or right or the top or the bottom and run it parallel, you'll know that you're accurately lined up. Okay, then you could take out your template, and once again, this time I'll do it from the bottom. I'm just kind of rolling this up so that I can get to my hoop. Just slide this underneath, and I'm kind of feeling for where the top of my hoop is. I'm gently setting that and then just walking down. And there's your nice straight hooping. And then take a look at the back of your hoop here, and I don't know how well you can see this on the camera. At the top, I'm pretty well flush. My two hoops are flush. Down here at the bottom, I need to sink this a little bit more. Can you see that it's not quite in place? There we go. How there's my inside hoop is not flush with my outside hoop. So I'm just going to use my thumbs and press that into place. And you can actually press that down so that your inside hoop is slightly past your outside hoop. I don't know who comes up with these names, but that's called burping the hoop. The farther down you get that, the more snug your hooping will be. So there we go. If you need to, and some teachers are going to say don't ever do this, I say pay attention when you're doing this. If you have a really, really baggy hooping, for one, just unhoop and start again. If you're having trouble getting your inside hoop into your outside hoop, you've tightened this a little bit too much, so just back off on that just a little bit. And again, you don't need it cranked down with a screwdriver tight. You just want it to be snug. But if you need to, if you gently pull evenly from both sides in, that will help snug up your hooping, and gently. That basically is just standard hooping with just a standard stabilizer. So this could have been, this was a tearaway, but this would work a tearaway, cutaway, no-show mesh, wash away stabilizers, any of your standard stabilizers, pretty much anything other than tacky stabilizers. But we're going to tackle that one next. Thanks. Here's another little tip. With hoops that are this large, it's hard to get a good tight hooping all around. So just beware of that, even though it's great to have the huge hoops. Sometimes they can actually cause a little bit of trouble. I'm relatively short, and when it comes to hooping these giant hoops, it's pretty difficult even standing to get a good even pressure reaching way far out. If you haven't figured this one out already, here's an easy little tip. Just turn this guy sideways. You have to reach much less, and it will be more ergonomically correct for you to hoop in this orientation than with it upright. We kind of get used to hooping upright because that's how the hoop's going to go in the frame. Just know, turn the hoop.